On news, I'm Jawad. Tehami. Pakistan's National Security Committee has warned that Israel's reckless military actions against Iran have dangerously escalated the regional tensions, threatening to spark a wider conflict and undermining prospects for dialogue and diplomacy. The committee also reaffirmed Iran's inherent right to self-defense. Pakistan had earlier condemned U.S. attacks on Iranian nuclear facilities and had said recourse to dialogue, diplomacy in line with the principles and purposes of the United Nations Charter remain the only viable pathway to resolve the crisis in the region. Pakistan's UN envoy has told the United Nations Security Council we must act now to prevent the situation from spiraling out of control. We had also seen Russia and China both also condemned US strikes on Iran's nuclear sites, with the Russian President Vladimir Putin saying, let me quote, the absolutely unprovoked aggression against Iran has no basis and no justification, unquote, with China saying, let me quote, US attacks on Iran's nuclear facilities had damaged Washington's credibility, unquote. We had also seen President Donald Trump had told that the US in massive precision strike had obliterated Tehran's key nuclear sites, and Iranian officials had promised retaliation, saying US violated Iran's sovereignty and had entered the war clearly and directly. We've also seen an important development. Iran's parliament had approved a plan to close the Strait of Hormuz, but the final decision is lying with the Supreme National Security Council. To discuss this developing situation in the Middle East, as far as Israel's aggression against Iran and Iran's retaliatory measures are concerned, we are honored to be joined in the studio by Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, foreign affairs expert. Dr. Jaspal, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are joined by Mr. Ali Hamza, Middle East expert. Mr. Hamza, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. On the video link, we'll be joined by Dr. Jamil Khan, former ambassador. Dr. Khan, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by another participant. I'll be introducing him as he joins in. Dr. Jaspal, the level of escalation at this particular point in time, but let's specifically talk about that statement from the Iranian officials that the US, through these strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, has clearly and directly become the part of the conflict which was underway already because of Israel's aggression. Now the level of escalation, what's your assessment regarding that?
I think that as you pointed out very clearly, Americans are not directly involved in an aggression against Iran. Earlier they were supporting Israel. It was a tacit approval, and at the same time assisting Israel in defending itself against the Iranian missiles and other drone strikes. But sending B-52 and striking 3 facilities with a mega bunker busters, and at the same time they were escorting, I think, over the 125 fighter jets. That indicates that United States have demonstrated its power, its might, and once again tried to terrorize the Iranians that you must change your regime or you must fulfill their demands. Now the conflict is escalating, but at the same time victory is not on the side of the Americans or the, you can say, Israelis.
That's a very important statement.
The reason is very simple. If Americans and Israelis in this war, this only objective was to dismantle Iranian's nuclear capability. According to the President Trump's statement last night, that was clear. He said that with this strike, we erased Iranian's 3 nuclear uranium enrichment facilities. So objective achieved according to that. Then why there is no ceasefire? Why there is a continuity of the war? It means either this objective has not been achieved or there are other objectives, like Iranian surrender to the Israeli increasing hegemony in the region, and second, regime change in Iran. So if that is not the objective, I think then this war will be, if they are failing, Iranians are not going to compromise on their sovereignty. So far, the way there is a clarity that Iranians are not going to surrender, and it's an open secret. It has been established by fact. You cannot change the regime through aerial strikes or through missiles. For changing the regime, you have to go and capture. Are Americans prepared to send their troops in Iran and face the body bags? No. Are Israelis capable to land their forces in Iran? No. Iran has a 650,000 plus standing army. So it's not easy. So by this way, maybe this war will further, as war is prolonging, it has been gaining a characteristic of protracted warfare in which, of course, with the use of these B-52 and mega strike, you can say bunker buster, where the war has escalated vertically and horizontally.
Right, I'll come back to you with the number of statements coming from the top officials, other than, of course, President Donald Trump, which clearly point out the fact that this particular strike was a precision strike and was particularly aimed at dismantling their nuclear.
Obliterated, they use the word, completely erased.
So the defense secretary also categorically, and the vice president also said that this was aimed at dismantling their nuclear capability. I'll come back to you with that particular point to be discussed further in detail. Dr. Jamil Khan, what's your understanding? How are you looking at this particular escalation of tensions in the Middle East, given the fact Iranians now clearly see the US being directly and clearly being involved after it struck 3 key Iranian nuclear facilities?
No, well, your voice was a little breaking, but I understood the question partially. Yes, the escalation seems to be writings on the wall. The statements given by Iranians post attack by United States on their nuclear facilities, that gives a very good idea that Iran would like to avail the right of their defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, because the violation had taken place by Israel as well as the United States of their sovereignty and territorial integrity. So from that standpoint, I guess they are making consultation today after the meeting of the foreign minister of Iran with Mr. Putin. They must have, there are certain things which comes to limelight, and the other things obviously cannot come to limelight. But Putin was clear about it, that yes, they have conveyed their message to the diplomatic channel, and the indication was that what the statement was made by the permanent representative of Russia in the United Nations Security Council, condemning and asking for the de-escalation. But then they were also mover of the resolution, Pakistan included, China, Pakistan, Russia, that the immediate ceasefire was asked. But things go much beyond that once it comes to supporting your ally. Iran is an ally of Russia. Iran is an ally of China. So both these countries, China has never supported any country during the war, but they've been supporting economically, they've been supporting in terms of the weapons and equipment. The agreement which China has with Iran is about $400 billion in next 20 years' time, 25 years' time. But in one of the agreements which Iran has with China is the intelligence sharing. Today, what we are seeing, the enhanced and escalated attacks on Israel by Iran, as compared to what they've been doing, the use of new missiles, Khyber, and the other missile, Imad. Imad is 1,800 kilometers, and it carries the warhead of 750 kg. That also evades the detection capacity and capability, which is, and that's how it has had an impact just about 2-3 hours ago, or even earlier, even later, is about 5 impacts, including the powerhouse, the There are certain cities, they are without any energy, without any power because of these attacks and impacts. And then whatever this information has been leaked out, we have to underscore that Israel has a very tight censorship of censorship, that none of the damages are shown to the world because the Israel feels that their supremacy and the way they've been projecting themselves as the most powerful country in this region, and they never expected that they would ever face this kind of a difficulty. It's true that Iran has suffered more, but then Iran can sustain that much of suffering because Iran is almost 9.5 times, 10 times bigger than Israel, 10 times more population, resilient nation, have their
Get
history.
your point. Dr. Jamil Khan, I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. When we talk about the conflict at this particular point in time, a quicker response regarding as to where diplomacy or the chances of this de-escalation of this particular conflict through dialogue at this particular point in time standing, as per your understanding.
Yeah, escalation. We have to really also try and analyze that the excess of resistance, which Israel claimed that they have been able to almost destroy that excess, and in a way partially correct, because Lebanon, there's a different regime and favorable regime to Israel and United States. Hezbollah does not have the same strength as it had, but we have to also keep in our mind that Hezbollah had 40,000 active fighters and about 200,000 people. They were eligible to fight and to participate in the conflict along with Hezbollah. So they have now melted with the society. And in Syria, again, militia, they have melted in the society. Iraq, they have already issued threat that they are going to take on some of the bases of the United States in Iraq. Yesterday did that. Houthis are very vocal about it, and Houthis have already given an indication that they may block Bab al-Mandab, which is about 31 kilometers wide, nautical miles wide, wide strait between Gulf of between the Aden and Eritrea, Gulf of Aden. So all these things combined together, it appears that these excess of resistance, what they've been calling, it's going to get alive again. And Iran has already said that we'll give you many surprises. One of the surprises which we can see is what I just mentioned, Imad the missile and the Khyber missile, which is the solid fuel ballistic missiles, and which has the maneuverable evading.
There are a number of other options that need to be assessed at this particular point in time. What could be the possible options at the hands of the Iranians? Dr. Jamil Khan, I'll come back to you for understanding or the possibility of opting those options from the Iranian side. Ms. Hamza, we saw President Trump initially talking in terms of 2 weeks' time that he'll be deciding whether to strike Iran or not. And then all of a sudden, this particular strike came. And if we look at that very statement of the American officials, the term deception has also been used, and very few people were aware of this particular operation that was going to be conducted on part of the US. What prompted US President Trump to move so quickly to launch such strikes against Iran? What do you think could be the immediate motive at that particular point in time?
Well, I'd say that it has been Mr. Trump's the greatest gamble of his career, of the political career, attacking Iran, because all of his predecessors, they have been trying to threaten Iran with different consequences, but they have not been belligerent enough to directly attack Iran. So it has been a great gamble. Well, it is yet to be seen how does this play out. But there's a lot of confusion in the United States itself, because today the CNN reported that according to an intelligence leak from the CIA, Americans were confident that Iran does not have the capacity to build an atomic bomb for at least 3 years. But still, the United States moved forward and attacked Iran. So there is a lot of confusion there. But I think that Iranians, they can play smart here. They can raise the political costs of this action by Trump for his politics. And they can hand him a political grenade by not acting against the United States directly, because there is a lot of lot of boiling temperature in the United States domestically. People are anti-war. Donald Trump has been the person who has campaigned against sending troops and getting engaged in foreign wars. And now if he's being dragged into a foreign war, a war United States
Was
would
he
be fighting for
dragged into
Israel.
this particular war?
Well,
despite that very narrative that he has built pre-election and also during that election campaign afterwards as well, we had been seeing President Donald Trump going that particular line, and all of a sudden this particular strike comes in.
Well, I'd say that Israel has been, the policy Israel has adopted, it has been spoiling any sort of negotiations, any sort of diplomacy, any sort of workable arrangement that could be reached upon between United States and Iran. They were going, before Israel attacked Iran directly, they were going to have negotiations in Oman. Then again, before the United States conducted these strikes against Iran, Iranians were engaging with the European partners, with the UK, with Germany, with France, and they were going to have some negotiations about that. So the Israeli policy has been to lure in and draw in United States directly into this war. So they have been always acting spoilers. So obviously the thing which prompted again the direct strikes by the United States on Iran, Israel is a very important factor when we look at all the possible options, all the possible factors that could have prompted Trump to take such a great gambling decision.
So what's your understanding? Is it going to be only limited to this particular strike with the on the Iranian nuclear facilities, as the defense secretary as well as the vice president has said?
Well, the Iranian response will matter a lot. That would be deciding what comes out of this situation actually, because there is an objective of the war. If the United States entered this war with an objective, if the objective was obliterating the nuclear facilities of Iran, so the satellite imagery is very clear about it, that Iranians had moved their enriched uranium outside of these facilities, and they have not been completely obliterated. Even the United States is not confident that Iran has obliterated these nuclear facilities completely, as Dr. Jaspal said, that if they were confident that they have obliterated it completely, why isn't there a ceasefire? Why the war continues? So obviously the objective of war has not been reached upon yet. So there is a clear chance of escalation, further escalation and proliferation of this war.
Right, Dr. Jaspal. Now, this word obliteration, it means it has completely gone, and the kind of tone that we see in that very speech by President Donald Trump, as well as later on by Defense Secretary as well, that shows that the mission has been accomplished. So it is accomplished. Do you think there could be any possibility of the US continuing with this particular line against Iran if the retaliation goes from the Iranian side? And what are the possible options with Iranians? We have seen Iranians so far launching that barrage of missiles and drones towards Israel. The US interests haven't been targeted so far.
I think that it's very important, and Hamza has already enlisted the reasons. But let me repeat it, what he said, that if there was one objective, they have achieved it according to the President Trump. But if there is no ceasefire, and Israel, whatever it is doing, is because of the American support. If today Americans decide that there must be ceasefire, Israel does not possess capacity to defend itself. It has been now exposed. Iron Dome has been exhausted. It needs new refueling and missiles, defensive missiles. And the way Iran has been increasing, Israeli cities are becoming more vulnerable. There is more infrastructure destruction. Maybe the casualties are lesser because of the training of the people going immediately to these pre-built shelters, and at the same time hiding the number of the casualties. But on the other side, when we look at what will be the Iranian strategy, if Iranians continue hitting the Israelis, they are hitting the Americans' interest as well. Because Americans desire that in the Middle East there must be a hegemony which they monitor or steward through Israel in the region. If the Iranians are not accepting, not submitting, it means that objective has yet to be achieved. Second is that where this will be heat escalate, I think Iranians for the time being, they are signaling two things politically, that their parliament has approved to close the Strait of Hormuz, and then the second, that may they exit from the NPT. And on the other side, they continue hitting the Israel. Instead of, and third, of course, hitting the American interest, for example, sending kamikaze boats to hit the American deployments or aircraft carriers, and it's, you can say, assisting ships in the Bahrain or in the other Arabian Sea area. And once again, igniting, even if they are compromised, but further, because Houthis, for 1 month, America used a massive ammunition and they failed to control it, something like that. But I think the Iranians definitely contemplating that today blocking oil in 2025 is a workable strategy or not, because we are not living into a 1970s, 80s or 90s. Today America is no more importer of the oil but exporter, and it can fulfill the demand of the Europeans through Atlantic channel, and this will be suitable for the Americans and the Russians. Second is that exiting the NPT, that will be losing their moral standing, because politically a religious fatwa also including that clearly says that Iran will be not going to make the nuclear weapons, and if they remain within the NPT, it means they are committed with their obligations or commitments with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty as a non-nuclear weapon state of the treaty, and all the requirements it is willing to fulfill, which are demands of the treaty, being a member of the treaty. Then it will be establishing the fact that the two nuclear armed states, United States and Israel, they attacked on a non-nuclear weapon state, member of the NPT, its civilian nuclear installations which were under the International Atomic Energy Agency safeguards. Of course, no one is going to support this new norm. So that will be a big, big thing in the diplomatic parlance. So by this way, I think that Iranians shall continue whatever they have a tactics to bleed the Israelis, indirectly bleeding the Americans, because for supplying the logistics to the Israelis, it will be definitely challenge for the Trump. For that, for after certain executive orders, he will be going to the Congress. And if the Iranians are not hitting the Americans' interest, or especially there is no American casualties, though Trump made this deception and depiction action, but Congress is asking, or congressmen are asking, that you have an executive power to launch a military operation if the threat is imminent and American personnel and interests are vulnerable to it. In this stage, this threat was imminent. Trump has to prove that why he launched the military operation without prior approval, and if Iranians are not retaliating, not moving out of the NPT, then Iranians are in a better position at diplomatic level and at the international level, and at the same time hitting Americans' interests indirectly by bleeding the Israel. Of course, Iranians are paying a big price. Iranians are, but they are already sanctioned state, and their nationalism is becoming more stronger. So people have to study Iranians, what we call it, socio-political culture as well. So in this entirely context, I think the situation is not favorable for the invaders or Israelis and the Americans, which go for unprovoked striking on Iran.
Okay, so opting out of NPT, you're of the view that Iran is not going to opt for that based on the moral standing.
No. I think opting the NPT and rushing for it at this stage, it's not advisable.
It's not advisable. So could you give us a sense, what do you
and
understand of
I
this?
think that Iranians must cop, because being an NPT member, they received enough support from the nuclear supply group for establishing their nuclear infrastructure and acquiring the nuclear know-how, and that's why still in the Bashar reactor Russian technicians or scientists are working, and it's you can say providing the electricity. So Iranians are beneficiary of the NPT. They can examine these ways more judiciously, whether they go out or not. But of course, these strikes have destroyed the credibility of the NPT, because striking on a non-nuclear weapon state of the NPT without any provocation, it strengthened this argument, which the realists or nuclear optimists say that if you need a sovereign defense in the modern time, you need a nuclear weapons, not being a non-nuclear weapon state.
So that is what exactly what we should understand from this particular statement by the IAEA. Global non-proliferation regime could crumble following the US strikes. The last part of your
Yeah, that's correct, because IAEA said that Iranians did not cross the red line. Americans intelligence said that the Iranians did not have, or you or I think Hamza also already pointed out that Iranians, according to the American intelligence same report, that Iranians were not making the nuclear weapon. Iranian supreme leader Fatima also says that they are not making the nuclear weapon. Then who are the Israelis to judge, which is also a nuclear weapon state? And what are the American sources? Is it the same, you can say, deception, duplicity, or a strong argument which they use against the Iraq and make the entire functional Iraq state converted into a dysfunctional state, and today it's a dysfunctional. So what is this? I think a international community or a moral voice which is very weak in the international community, sorry to say it, but at least the Iranians have a good case.
Right. Dr. Jamil Khan, what's your understanding? We'll talk about the PT. What could be the possible options resting with Iran regarding this particular treaty at the moment?
Well, Iran has given an indication that they might as well scrap this treaty, and under Article 10, if I remember it correctly, of the treaty, any country which has signed can really walk out from under certain conditions if there is a state of emergency and other conditions. So from that standpoint, yes, Iran has given some indication. But what are the advantages of Iran? In fact, as Dr. Zafar was just mentioning, that Iran would definitely like to have some relief, like to have some condemnation, like to have some kind of a statement for the retribution of those who have attacked the nuclear facilities which were under the safeguard of the IAEA, and that is also against the additional protocol of Geneva Convention 54, that none of these such facilities could be attacked. But then the bigger question is, does the United States respect international law? At least in case of Iraq, it did not do it. In case of Libya, it did not do it. In case of Syria, it did not do it, except for Afghanistan, where partial approval was given by the Security Council. There was no other Security Council approval. So if we have that in our mind, perhaps they would not have that regard, but at least they will have that much of pressure from the world community. But then a bigger question is, does that pressure work? What bigger pressure could have been there than the people flooded on the roads from in Europe and the United States and so many other countries in favor of Gaza and against the genocide of Gaza? Nothing happened. Again, veto after the veto by United States. So that's why people in the United States, they say that the United States is Israel and Israel is the United States. And in order to understand this very, very the thoughts of the United States decision maker, it's very important to really correlate it with the Israeli lobby. And there's a book of John Mearsheimer who has really proved this point. He's a social scientist, a professor in Chicago University. And then because of the influence of that lobby, most of the decisions, even if it's not in the national interest of the United States, and if it's in favor of Israel, that decision is made. NPT, yes, Iran can walk out. And if they does that, now there are some of the comments which one can monitor, that why Iran did make the nuclear warhead, a nuclear bomb, because they had already reached 60% of the enrichment, and after 60%, it's just days and weeks away that they can really reach to they could have reached to the weapon grade. And now, if they have not done it, I guess now they have realized that how important it is for the countries to save themselves, to defend themselves, to have this nuclear capability.
I get your point. Dr. Jamil Khan, former ambassador, please stay with us. I'll have to go to another participant joining us on the phone line. Lieutenant General retired Talat Masood, senior analyst. General Masood, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. General Masood, looking at this particular statement by one of the key officials from the Iranian side. He says, let me quote, Trump, you may start this war, but we will be the one to finish it, unquote. Now, as per your understanding, what are the most appropriate options at the hands of Iranians at this particular point in time to counter what Israel has been doing and what the US has done to the nuclear sites?
Well, I think Iran is very clear now that whereas it has developed a capability of it has does the enrichment, and I think their enrichment can reach the levels which are required to produce a bomb, but they would not do that. That they have already stated many a time, and they are again reiterating that. But at the same time, if their integrity of Iran is threatened, and Israel thinks that it can even bomb Iran and destroy Iran and all that, and they will probably have no other option but to also make a nuclear bomb. But I don't think things will go that far, and sanity would prevail, and the U.S. should play a very sort of such a role that Iran is not compelled.
Janab Masood, I seek your pardon for the interjection over here. I'll have to go for a quick short break. After the break, we'll resume the discussion from here. For that, stay tuned. Welcome back to Views on News. In the studio, we are joined by Professor Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal and Mr. Ali Hamza. Ali Hamza, when we talk about the possibilities, the Strait of Hormuz, the Iranian parliament has given the approval to a plan to close this. But of course, the final decision lies with the Supreme National Security Council. How doable that particular option for Iranians is, and what sort of implications do you think is going to have largely in the region, and could there be a negative effect as far as US interests or Israeli interests because of this closure are concerned could be manifested, or it could have an adverse impact on Iranians themselves?
Well, when we talk about the feasibility of closing down the Strait of Hormuz or establishing a blockade there, tactically speaking, I think in 1988 when the Iranians tried to mine this Gulf, this region, the Americans were dealt a very hard blow to the Iranians, and tactically it would be very hard looking at the military capacities of Iran and the United States, because the Fifth Fleet is just in the neighborhood. They are there, present there, just for the sake of protecting this waterway. So tactically it would be very hard, but still Iranians have those kamikaze ships. They can use their cruise missiles, and then they can use their other partners, the proxies we have been talking about, the Houthis. They could be substantial in supporting any sort of action in that region. But when we see the what consequences will come out of any blockade which is established from Iranian side, I think it would have very high stakes for Iran itself as well. Marco Rubio, just a few minutes back, he was very clear that the Chinese should stop the Iranians from doing anything like that, because I think Iran's 80% of its total export, which is oil, that passes from this region, and the blockade which is established here, it would be affecting the countries of global south mostly, because the United States, as Marco Rubio was very clear, that it does not directly affect the United States, because the United States is not importing oil from the Strait of Hormuz. And then there are other regional Arab states which are exporting oil from this region. So I think they will also be very relevant in this situation. So will Iran be pitting itself against all of its neighboring states and many other states which are not party to the conflict? That is the most important question here. And we can also speculate very clearly that using a threat as a leverage, it is more beneficial for Iran. It has been using this threat as a leverage of closing down the Strait of Hormuz. Then it is more beneficial, I think, when Iran actually closes the Strait of Hormuz. The situation would be very different.
I get
the more practical option is that Iran uses the proxies, the Houthis, and they just establish the same sort of blockade they have been doing since the beginning of this year in the Bab al-Mandeb and the Red Sea area.
Right. Dr. Jaspal, now with this particular strategic partnership between Iran and the Russians, Mr. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, has also said that offering mediation to de-escalate this particular conflict is also a form of support.
Yes.
Is that the only support that we can see from Russians coming to the Iranians, or there could be any other manifestations?
I think that this is one of the biggest support which Russians can offer at this time.
Mhm.
We have to take into account the limitations of the Russians. Though Russians and Iranians have a strategic partnership according to which they have to assist each other in a military conflict. But the question is that whether the Russians have a capacity. Russians are fighting in the Ukraine, where 32 countries are standing against it in support of the Ukraine. So it's a almost 3 years war, more than that. So by this way, when you look about this war, Russia has been a lot of consumes there. Second is the Russia has a big challenge. Israel, which is hosting the 1.5 million or plus Jews which have a Russian origin and Russian language or ancestry. So Russians can't attack it because Russians themselves consider as a protector, promoter or guarantor of the prosperity of the Russian ethnics or Russian speaking people who are living out of the Russian Federation.
Right.
So militarily again it makes, so Russians are very much checkmated. But at the same time, Russians are continuing supporting Iran diplomatically and politically. When the Americans asked the Russians, or the international community, American-led community asked the Russians to, you can pull back their scientists from the Bashar reactor, they refused.
Right. Professor Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, foreign affairs expert, thank you very much for taking time out for views on news and joining us in the studio. I would really appreciate that. Mr. Ali Hamza, Middle East expert. Ali Hamza, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take care of yourselves.